This very interesting segment coming up. I'm very excited about this. Hillary Clinton taking part in an unconventional interview ahead of tomorrow's debate. On Sunday, she sat down with the hosts of BuzzFeed's Another Round podcast and touched on several topics, including the Black Lives Matter movement. Take a listen.
If it's going to be a movement and not just a plea, then it has to build on making changes that people either have to accept or they have to embrace. And in many ways, getting people to accept the changes that are necessary will require consistent pressure and leadership at all levels, in the community all the way to the White House. And that then you have to keep making the case, as I have tried to make, going back a long in this campaign, going back to the first speech I gave at Columbia University in New York. You've got to be willing to constantly say there are gross inequities, and you can't act like they don't exist.
So I want to bring in right now Heben, Nigatu, and Tracy Clayton. They're the hosts of BuzzFeed's Another Round podcast. And we should note, MSNBC's parent company, NBC Universal, has made an investment in BuzzFeed. But I'm so excited to meet both of you because I not only listened to your stuff, I was very impressed with this interview because you got Hillary Clinton to admit that she was built in a garage in Palo Alto. So if you haven't heard it, you should really listen to it. But Heben, let me start with you. This was just 2 days after Hillary Clinton met with the Black Lives Matter movement. How do you think that she was influenced by that conversation to then your questions?
I wasn't aware of the timeline of their conversation, so I wasn't thinking, oh, she had already discussed with them, or this is something she was preparing for outside of our own interview. So I knew that I anticipated that she'd think that we'd ask about it.
Were you impressed by what she said, and basically you reap what you sow?
It's hard for me to be impressed by a politician.
Really?
But I am impressed that she was very present in the conversation. There were times where it felt like, oh, I met a woman in Iowa, and it started to feel a little talking pointsy. But for the most part, she stayed present and answered our questions pretty earnestly. Okay,
and so for Tracy, what was the most impressive part for you, or what part sticks out as most memorable of where this conversation went?
The part that sticks out to me personally as most memorable is the question that I asked her, regardless of what her intentions were back when a lot of the crime initiatives were passed in the 90s that black people are really suffering from now as far as mass incarceration goes. I asked, regardless of your intent, do you ever sit back and think, wow, I really screwed this up for black people? Because I think there's a big faction of people in the black community that really want her say, you know, I screwed up and I'm sorry. It wasn't my intent, but I'm sorry. And just for her to take some responsibility.
Well, there are big headlines that have different words being used that I can't say.
Up is the
yeah, that I can't say.
For you
yes, but let's bring in my colleague Steve Kornacki, who has a question as well for the lady. Steve.
Yeah, well, Heben, I thought I'd ask you, I'm kind of curious, you got Hillary Clinton in a setting a lot of people don't get her in. A lot of journalists are probably jealous of you. It's a very casual setting. You got her talking a little bit more off the cuff. You got her maybe a little more off the script than we're accustomed to seeing. Did you think you were seeing a different Hillary Clinton than has come across for the last 20 years in the media?
Well, to prepare for the interview, I watched a lot of her interviews, both from the very early part of her career when she first got on the scene and now in her campaign trail. So I was pretty well-versed in what she was well-versed in by the time I got to the interview. So I was impressed and, glad that she really took the time to, engage in a more lighthearted and more just human way than you're allowed to be even on the campaign trail.
So when it comes to who's next on your radar?
Donald Trump.
Tracy, is it Donald Trump?
Ben Carson.
Open invitation.
And Ben Carson?
Yes. Please,
okay.
please.
So have you reached out to their people?
Not yet.
Not yet?
We're putting our feelers out there, though.
Okay.
Yes. Putting our ear to the street.
I got an email for Trump I can give you, and I'll give it to you right now.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so Heben, thank you so much. Tracy, thank you so much. Our Steve Kornacki, thank you, sir. And if you want to hear more of Heben and Tracy's interview with Hillary Clinton, you can download the podcast at itunes.com/anotherround. It's good stuff. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
And speaking of Hillary Clinton,